Friends, would you please join with me in the spirit of prayer?
So precious Lord, take our hand. Lead us on and help us stand, so that the words of our hearts and the meditations of our minds, the very stirring of our spirits this day, will be grounded and guided by your grace. And that would continue to last and linger every day this week. In the name of the one who came to show us the way to live in the light of your love, Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen. Every single one of us has within us a drum beat. Right here. If you would please, take your hand and put it on your heart. And softly, gently, begin to tap. Bum, 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 bum. There were moments this last week when laughter joined with this beat, and you became and embodied an entire symphony. There were times, perhaps in the last weeks or months, when your pulse quickened. You could feel that beat in the tiny vein of your neck, hear it in your very ear. This morning, we will listen to the insights, to the wisdom, to the ways that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke to the beat within each one of us in the sermon, The Drum Major Instinct. And we need to listen to these words. I invite you to listen to the words, not only here in your head, but to let them sink and settle down here into your heart, getting caught up in the rhythm and the beat within you. Listen to these words, not just as something from the past, but as wisdom for today and a truth that continues to march on and lead us. In between some of the excerpts in the sermon this morning, you're going to hear our youth drumming. Sometimes the drumming that they will offer is a call and a response, a reminder of the relationships, the ebb and flow of life. Sometimes what you're going to hear and experience this morning in the drums might sound a bit chaotic, because that too metaphorically speaks to such a time as this. And so I invite you to listen. Listen with your heart and your life wide open to these words of wisdom from Dr. King, who reminds us that the one who came from God came not to be served, but to be a servant of others and to show us the way. Colin, please come forward and share the first excerpt.
On February 4th, 1968, just 2 months before his assassination on April 4th, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King delivered a sermon entitled The Drum Major Instinct at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. This morning, we will read excerpts from and reflect on that sermon. The setting is clear. James and John are making a specific request of the Master. They had dreamed, as most of the Hebrews dreamed, of a coming of King of Israel who would set Jerusalem free and establish his kingdom on Mount Zion and in righteousness rule the world. And they thought of Jesus as this kind of king. And they were thinking of that day when Jesus would reign supreme as this new King of Israel. And they were saying, now, when you establish your kingdom, let one of us sit on the right hand and the other on the left hand of your throne. Now, very quickly, we would automatically condemn James and John, and we would say they were selfish. Why would they make such a selfish request? But before we condemn them too quickly, let us look calmly and honestly at ourselves and we will discover that we too have those same basic desires for recognition, for importance, that same desire for attention, that same desire to be first. Of course, the other disciples got mad with James and John, and you can understand why. But we must understand that we too have some of these same James and John qualities. And there is deep down within us all an instinct. It's a kind of drum major instinct, a desire to be out front, a desire to lead the parade, a desire to be first. And it is something that runs the whole gamut of life. And you know, we begin early to ask life to put us first. Our first cry as a baby was a bid for attention, and all through childhood, the drum major impulse or instinct is a major obsession. Children ask life to grant them first place. They are a little bundle of ego, and they have innately the drum major impulse or the drum major instinct. Now, in adult life, we still have it, and we never really get by it. We like to do something good, and you know, we like to be praised for it. Now, if you don't believe that, you can just go on living life, and you will discover very soon that you will like to be praised. Everybody likes it, as a matter of fact. And somehow, this warm glow we feel when we are praised, or when our name is in print, is something of the vitamin A to our ego.
There comes a time that the drum major instinct can become destructive. And that's where I want to move now. I want to move to the point of saying that if this instinct is not harnessed, it becomes a very dangerous, pernicious instinct. When one fails to harness this instinct, he ends up trying to push others down in order to push himself up. It leads to tragic, and we've seen it happen so often, tragic race prejudice. Do you know that a lot of the race problem grows out of the drum major instinct, a need that some people have to feel superior, a need that some people have to feel that they are first, and to feel that their white skin ordained them to be first. And they have said it over and over again in ways that we see with our own eyes. In fact, not too long ago, a man down in Mississippi said that God was a charter member of the White Citizens Council. And so God being the charter member means that everybody who's in that has a kind of divinity, a kind of superiority. And think of what has happened in history as a result of this perverted use of the drum major instinct. It has led to the most tragic prejudice, the most tragic expressions of man's inhumanity to man. And not only does this thing go into the racial struggle, it goes into the struggle between nations. And I would submit to you this morning that what is wrong in the world today is that the nations of the world are engaged in a bitter, colossal contest for supremacy.
Thank you. In this speech, Martin Luther King tells us that racism is the wrong way to demonstrate the drum major instinct, and that service to others is the right way to demonstrate the drum major instinct. So I want us to reflect today on racism and service. Now, from the service standpoint, the drum major speech was a major inspiration for me in my life of service. On the racism side, I wanted to share with you my back-to-back trips to South Africa and to the Cheyenne River Reservation. Well, I was president of the YMCA of Minneapolis. And in 2008, a small group of African-American Y leaders and I journeyed to South Africa because we wanted to see if we could be helpful with the Y movement following the end of apartheid. So it wasn't your typical tourist trip, but we went into the black townships and the colored townships and we met with the people. We were always greeted with warmth and love and friendliness. But the South African people were very frank with us in helping us to understand the brutality and racism of apartheid and to help us and to tell us that they needed help. So we decided that when we returned to the U.S., we would recruit others to come, to hear their story, to meet these beautiful people, and hopefully to help. So I returned to Minneapolis, all shook up from that experience, by the way. And then 2 days later, I went on a 500-mile, 12-hour trip with 35 of my staff to the Cheyenne River Reservation in Dupree, South Dakota, the poorest county in the nation. No planes, no trains, no buses go there. It's isolated. Now, the reason for the trip was I'd taken my staff through training about racism because you have to be exposed to it in order to figure to do something about it. So I took them through some training called Courageous Conversations About Race. And the field trip was our learning opportunity. You can't understand racism unless you go and see it. And one of the interesting things on that trip, that 11-hour trip, was we were driving through the small towns of Minnesota and South Dakota and North Dakota where many of my staff had grown up, and they were telling these wonderful stories of growing up in all these communities. And oh, that was so interesting and invigorating for me. But no one seemed to know or be exposed to the history of our Native Americans, the genocide, the oppression, the exile, the poverty of the reservations. And so it's 10 years later. And what I wanted to say to you, that because of those experiences, the services and the support has gotten stronger and stronger in both. In South Africa, there's been a wonderful expansion of services to communities. Over 500 volunteers from America have gone there to help. In fact, the largest group ever, 46, is going in March, and millions of dollars have been raised. And with the Cheyenne River Reservation, my staff came back so inspired that they recruited volunteers to build youth summer programs, and this continues to go on today. And also, by the way, there's a board of trustees that raises money for the Cheyenne River Reservation and their programs. So here's what I want us to think about. You can't address racism unless you know it and you see it. So when you go on their turf, the visit to their turf, and hearing their history, their personal experiences, as well as their hopes and dreams for the future, was a major building block for understanding, for trust, for relationship, and oh yes, for an inspiration to serve. I cannot think of these two communities, South Africa and the Cheyenne River Reservation, without positive thoughts about these wonderful relationships with the people and how important it was to make a difference. So I salute drum majors for service. And if we can help somebody, if we can make a difference, we can live a life of significance.
What was the answer that Jesus gave these men? It's very interesting. One would have thought that Jesus would have condemned them. One would have thought that Jesus would have said, "You're out of your place. You are selfish. Why would you raise such a question?" But that isn't what Jesus did. He did something altogether different. He said in substance, "Oh, I see. You want to be first. You want to be great. You want to be important. You want to be significant. Well, you ought to be. If you're going to be my disciple, you must be." But he reordered priorities, and he said, yes, don't give up this instinct. It's a good instinct if you use it right. It's a good instinct if you don't distort and pervert it. Don't give it up. Keep feeling the need to be important, keep feeling the need to be first. But I want you to be first in love. I want you to be first in moral excellence. I want you to be first in generosity. That is what I want you to do. And so Jesus gave us a new norm of greatness. If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I'd like somebody to mention that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. Yes, I want you to say that I was a drum major. Say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody who is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be